A woke, leftist, socialist, and academic gets stunned after Charlie Kirk shoots down for a race-baiting plot. Guys, we're gonna get right into this video. I know you're gonna like it, so just please help me out real quick and like our video, share it around, and if you're new, subscribe to the Resist the Mainstream YouTube channel so we can keep bringing you guys this great content. As always, everybody, I'm your host, Darian. Let's get into the video.
No, not always, but can you name one example?
Of systemic racism?
Yeah.
So what did you think about the example I brought up in my opening remarks? The example of housing discrimination and redlining.
Like redlining? Yeah, so
with redlining.
You know Thomas Sowell's treatise on redlining?
I don't.
Yeah, you should read it.
What does it say? Are you able to tell me
Yeah,
this
it's
moment?
actually right here. He said, redlining, do you know that whites were turned down for mortgages more than Asians?
I'm unclear what relevance that has
Because
to
it
the
wasn't
white-
racially based. The redlining myth, according to Thomas Sowell, which I'm sure you believe in, says, quote, nor did either the mainstream media or political leaders ever mention the fact that black-owned banks turned down black mortgage loan applicants at least as often as white-owned banks did. Why were blacks turning down their own people?
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking
Obviously
about it.
you don't, because this is
Well,
the
Charlie,
facts.
I would like to be very specific here.
I was just very specific.
So I'm talking about the GI Bill, which allowed people who had served in our wars, including a lot of black Americans, to come back and
No,
get
you're talking about redlining, right? So this is redlining.
No, this is connected to redlining.
No, which one do you want to talk about, GI Bill or redlining?
If you allow me to explain, this is connected to redlining.
Okay.
And I guess you don't understand that, but I'm happy to explain it to you right now if you just let me get this out. I promise you it'll be worth the effort. The GI Bill gave low interest loans to people who had served in the war, right? And those loans were issued they were federally backed loans. So the banks would issue to people at a low interest rate so that they could buy homes and generate what we now understand to be the basis of middle class wealth in this country. What ended up happening was the process of redlining was that banks said, oh, we're only going to issue loans for you to buy in certain neighborhoods.
Right, black banks.
All banks.
Right, so why did
Charlie,
black banks do that?
The overwhelming majority of issuers in
No,
this
you
country...
got to answer the question. Why did black banks do that?
I will answer your question. But what I'm talking about is the overwhelming majority of issuers, just like today, even more so back then, the overwhelming majority of issuers were white-owned banks. And those banks redlined communities where they said, we will not issue to people who live in these communities. Now, what ended up happening, what that meant for black people, was because of what's called a restrictive covenant, which meant that in the law, in the covenant that attached to the land for a lease, many of them precluded black people from buying in those neighborhoods. So basically what happened was banks would only lend to people and give those low interest loans to people who were allowed to live in white neighborhoods, which meant that systemically, black people were not allowed, weren't able to take advantage of that same low interest loan program that enabled.
Speaking of economics and finances, how about that Joe Biden economy? I'm loving it. Just kidding, totally sarcastic. It sucks, guys, but there is some good news, all right? You can invest in precious metals and perhaps hedge against inflation, as I have done myself. So check it out, guys. We are partnered with Goldco. You can go to rtmgold.com. You can click the link in the description or type in your web browser. There are a lot of benefits to investing in precious metals. Just look at the history of gold. As the value of the dollar has dropped, the value of gold has increased. Seems like a good deal to me. Aside from that, you can roll over your IRA or 401k penalty and tax-free. Yes, you heard that right, penalty and tax-free. And you can even get a free gold kit. That's right, free gold kit to help you make this decision, because we know it is a big one to make and it's no laughing matter. So check it out, everybody. Go to rtmgold.com. You can click the link in the description and type in your web browser. Goldco will give you the white glove customer service treatment that you deserve. So go on over and check it out. rtmgold.com.
Enabled so many white people who ordinarily would not have been able to afford a house because they fought and served in our wars to do so. Now, how many black banks are in America, and how many black banks were in America in the 1960s,
if there's even one
Charlie?
example, that's the question.
No, because
but blacks were discriminating against themselves, and whites were being discriminated more than Asian Americans.
This is what's so fascinating.
Let me answer this question. Why was
did
black?
you want me to answer your question about
well,
black
you're not.
bank
You're dodging and you're dancing.
No, I'm happy to.
Very bluntly.
Let the record reflect that I'm happy to answer your question about black boners. My point is that
answer the question.
Before we started this conversation, Charlie, you assured me that it would not be pugilistic in nature.
It's not. I'm asking you to answer a question, and you're not doing that.
The question is, how many black banks are in America at the time issuing those kinds of loans? Charlie, at the end of the day,
so you're not answering.
if you
I got it. That's fine. No, it's okay.
Charlie,
So,
answer my question to you, which came first.
It's probably
actually.
a low percentage, but Thomas Sowell's scholarship, which is a lot more extensive than yours,
that's a logical fallacy.
Says this.
Just because you can find one counterexample.
Do you know who Thomas Sowell is?
Of course I do.
He's
a black conservative public intellectual who a lot of people respect.
Who won a Nobel laureate for his research on this.
Charlie,
He's more than just a black conservative public intellectual. He's, like Charlie said, an award-winning economist. He also happens to be black, which I think is kind of interesting and important context in case anyone's not familiar with that. Sowell was arguing against affirmative action before just about anybody. You have videos of him doing so at the latest, the early 2000s, and he published a full-fledged study on the practice, studying affirmative action around the world. Really a smart and well-accomplished guy.
It's a big deal.
If you want to have a debate with Thomas Sowell, or if Thomas Sowell wants to have a debate with me, I'd be happy to do that. But I think that we two here can sit here as people with the ability to reason.
No, I agree. But I'm going to trust Sowell more than you. I'm sorry. It's like, because he actually lived through this.
Well, why did you ask me here if you weren't interested in me explaining to you
I would think
my perspective on the world?
You would at least have some response to this, which you don't. And that's fine.
Well, no,
Just
Charlie,
say you don't.
Charlie, if we're going to move forward, we're going to have to get back past this basic logical fallacy that you keep encountering.
Which one is that?
Which is that if one counterexample of the thing that satisfies your argument exists in the world, you seem to think that the gestalt of human existence doesn't matter.
No, there's a lot more than one example.
There are hardly any black banks in America today, Charlie, but you think that the existence of one black bank in 1963, who, according to you, based on ephemera, discriminated against a black person,
First of all, you're getting way too worked up. You are.
Undermines the entire reality of a white banking system that systemically did not issue loans.
Let me ask you another question.
Did you know?
Speaking of black banks, did you all know that in many cases, black banks are more likely to discriminate against black lenders than white lenders? And you can argue it's a racial thing or it's not. That's not really the point. The point is, there are reasons for these discrepancies, and to simply just point to race is a little bit ridiculous. Have we, for example, discussed the average credit score of the average black person who is seeking a loan versus that of the average white person? And same goes for Asian too. As Charlie mentioned earlier, Asians are less likely to get denied from their loans than whites. Does that suggest that there's systemic Asian supremacy against white people? Probably not. It probably has more to do with how likely they are to actually pay the loan back.
No, Charlie, that in 1947, there were 3,200 VA guaranteed loans in a random state, let's say Mississippi, and only 2 of them were issued to non-white borrowers. And it's not just the South.
Let me ask you a question, though.
In New York and New Jersey,
why is it
there were 67,000 of these loans, and only 100 of those 60,000 went to non-white borrowers.
So
why do you think that was, Charlie?
Well, so let me ask you a question. First of all, of course, it's partially racism, partially structural in the sense not that it's inequality.
So we have structural racism.
No.
So I don't understand what the argument is.
No, it's not. It's also because that blacks did not have their own capital accounts.
No.
It's also because of this.
No, it's not.
Let me ask you a question.
That's why we're talking about the GI Bill,
Let me ask you,
Charlie.
why is it that black incomes increased while redlining was also prevalent? Black incomes increased faster than white incomes.
What does income have to do with
everything?
No, Charlie.
If redlining was so terrible, why were blacks getting richer than whites in the 40s?
I don't think you're understanding.
No, answer the question. Why were blacks getting richer than the whites?
You don't understand. You don't understand. It seems like what redlining is.
No, I do.
No, Charlie, your ability to buy a house is not the same thing as your ability to earn a higher income.
Your grandparents were harmed by redlining, is that right?
My great-grandparents were,
So how'd you get to Harvard if it was so awful? Because if systemic racism is real, you went to the best school in the world. That doesn't make any sense.
You're saying that because racism exists, because I went to Harvard, racism can't exist.
No, I'm asking us a very simple question. If redline was so detrimental, how'd you get to Cambridge?
What is the relevance? Don't dodge the relevance of
No,
your
it's
question,
very relevant.
Charlie.
Obviously, you're arguing against your own story.
No, I'm not.
Only in only in a country as unracist as America could someone like you, who says it's so racist and redlining, also go to Harvard, the best school on the planet.
Do you believe that during Reconstruction there was no racism? Do you believe that before
How many acres did slaves get post-Civil War? 19 million acres blacks got.
You've accused me of interrupting you and not answering the question. How many? Do you believe there was racism prior to the end of the Civil Rights Movement and prior to basically during Reconstruction?
On the question about the black Americans in the 1940s gaining wealth, you saw the same thing during the Jim Crow era in the 60s as well. In fact, if you look at the average black family in the 60s versus the average black family today, they went from having 1 in 4 households having a single parent to 3 in 4. Think about that difference. That's insane. In other words, back when America was allegedly more racist, right? If we're following the left's narrative, the country was more racist than the Civil Rights Movement came, then it was less racist. When America was supposedly more racist, black people were doing far better economically and in terms of crime outcomes, household outcomes, everything. I think it's worth sitting there and pondering why that is. And that analysis can follow many different tracks. One, for instance, Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society. Let's not forget what he said. We'll have those N-words voting Democrat for over 200 years. That was a quote attributed to him, and it's very likely he said it considering he provably used the N-word numerous times and was a huge racist and also a welfare king.
Construction after the end of that.
Of course there was. Do I think it actually had an impact?
Do you know that there were black people who went to Harvard during that period? Do you think that racism didn't exist because black people didn't go? That black people went to Harvard during that period.
The argument is that America became progressively less racist. You're the one that's focusing on race.
Wait.
I'm not.
No, Charlie. You asked me to have a conversation about race, but I am no racial expert. I'm a leftist who talks about socialism.
You're getting way too worked up.
No, Charlie. Don't also do that. Look,
you are.
I would be happy to come here and not talk about race. In fact, my whole like career in writing is talking about a lot of racial overreaches on the left, critiquing the way that identity politics is used to have hierarchies of oppression in a way that ignores class as a key metric that cuts through communities. That's my whole thing. Why you asked me to come here and talk about race is a decision on you. Please don't put that on me.
Because you believe in a mythology. That's why. You believe in something that's akin to Zeus or Hercules. I mean, you believe in something that doesn't exist and never will, which is systemic racism. You're living proof at how unracist America is.
And apparently so is W.E. Du Bois.
Well, guys, we're going to have to cut that off right there. There's plenty more, but we'll have to get to another time. With all that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Please comment below. Let us know what you liked about the clip, what kind of stuff you want to see in the near future, and we'll see you guys again soon. Thanks, and God bless.